Alrighty, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If I could just have you state your full name and what activity you participate in or your roles.
Sure. My name is Justin Javier Enriquez. I am the mariachi director at Tucson High Magnet School.
Awesome. Okay. And to start with the first question, in what ways do you think these programs shape a student's sense of identity or connection to culture?
Well, definitely by us playing a cultural music, it helps them to understand about the culture that's been laid out for them by, people that have come before them, whether it be their parents, their grandparents, or just being of Mexican heritage. But in a lot of ways, we're creating a lot of new culture as well. We create a culture of acceptance here within the classroom, and we learn a lot about not only our national heritage and our culture, but learning how to manage the Americanness in us as well as the Mexicanness in us. And so that's what I mean about like creating new culture. We're neither just American or just Mexican. We're a blend of the two. And, a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's not traditional, or and my question is, well, what is tradition? Even in Mexico, when I was taking a few workshops, I would ask, a couple of maestros in Veracruz, especially, and I said, well, how do you know if this is a traditional step or if this is a traditional song? And they would say the same thing. Well, what is tradition? And I think it's important that we continue to ask ourselves that question and learn how to evolve what has been laid down for us, keeping true to the tradition of, I guess, the spirit, rather than like, oh, this has to be regionally accurate dress, or this has to be regionally accurate the way you're singing it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have a big appreciation for the instructors yourself as well
Thank
for
you.
definitely teaching us the pride that we should have for these traditions, and even if they change, because they're changing all the time. If you go back to like the origins of where mariachi comes from, it's come
Mm-hmm.
such a long way. We've added instruments, we've added different people to our ensembles, and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, and like when you look at the original, like when you look at early photos of mariachi ensembles, they weren't even dressed the way we traditionally think of mariachi right now in the traje de gala. They're usually dressed in calzón de manta, with just like a red sash, and if maybe a hat.
yeah,
But over time, then they changed that tradition, and then they started using the traje de gala, and then even that has evolved because it started out with the traditional traje de faena, and then it eventually got more elegant to the point where we have like now embroidery, and we have buttons down the side of the pants and such. And so if back then we had stayed with the mindset, oh no, we have to stay in traditional calzón de manta, then here in 2025 we would still be wearing calzón de manta, but we don't. And so it's important to always revisit those ideas and learn how to evolve, but like I said, maintaining the spirit and the tradition of that region or what it means to be Mexicano.
yes, of course. And then I also wanted to just touch on the subject of you kind of bringing in a newer culture of like how to be within like the ensemble. Bringing
Mm-hmm.
that like better connection towards everyone. That makes like being in there so much better. Like being comfortable with your instructors, with your peers.
Yeah.
I find that so like heartwarming because when I got here, that's how I felt. Of course, when I was in middle school, it was like that. We were all very connected with one another. But I feel like when I came into your class specifically, we touched on like more deeper type of like how do I say it? Sorry,
It's
I'm just
okay.
trying to find the words to describe it. Just oh, you're all good.
Uh,
Um,
well, and that's what I mean about like the culture that we try to be here, because not everybody comes from the same background. That some people are very fluent in Spanish, some people don't speak Spanish at all. But really, I think what I try to create within this classroom is a someplace where everybody feels like they belong, regardless of where they come from, where they've been, or where they're going. Someplace where they kind of can carve their own niche, and they don't necessarily have to change who they are in order to fit into the class, but rather the class changes to accommodate them and to include them. And so I'm glad that you got that sense when you were here at Tucson High. And even now, being out of the school, that you still feel that, because that's ultimately what my goal is.
Yes, definitely. I take that with me because you just meet so many new people, so many different paths of life once you get into college, or even if you don't, getting into your adult life, going to work, moving, it all comes together. And I just really, that is a definite aspect that I still take with me. So, now.
That's good. That's good. I'm happy to hear that.
Alrighty, moving on to the second question. Have you seen students carry lessons from the program into other parts of their lives, academically, professionally, or personally?
Yes, I've had a lot of students that either come back to give their personal testimonies to my current students, or students that just reach out to me, like when they've had one of those aha moments outside of Tucson High, and they'll reach out to me and they'll be like, "Oh, I ran across this and it reminded me of you," or like the biggest thing that I teach is not even repertoire. I think what I teach is 4 fundamental skills. It's a skill of self-reflection, of developing knowledge and skill, while at the same time blending it with the knowledge and skill that they already possess. Learning how to use that knowledge and skills and apply it to actually do something. In our case, it's music or building relationships. And then the last thing is connecting, using your sense of purpose, your knowledge and skills, applying it to create connections with each other, with the community, and most often with yourself. You find connections within yourself that you knew were there but didn't really know until you dove a little bit deeper into that. And so a lot of it's what I call it's not what I call, it's called the 4 winds, and it's not something that I made up. It was something that was handed down to me. A lot of indigenous cultures teach the same kind of, use that same methodology to approach life. And so a lot of students say that they use those 4 fundamental ideas to organize their lives when they're in college, or whenever they're like in their profession, or even just to manage like everyday, circumstances that they may be facing. They, reflect on it first, then they think about all the things that they know about the current situation. Then it allows them to fill in the deficit. And if they don't know something, then they learn like how to manage those problems or how to build up those skills in order to be able to apply it, and then ultimately to reach the goal through connection.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely, one of the bigger things that I've taken out of like the lessons that you taught us is definitely the networking.
Yes.
And like getting to know a bunch of like other people. In mariachi, you do that all the time, whether you're in one group to another, or going from one school to another. It always happens. You're always working with like a bunch of different people.
Yeah, and even more so now because we're so connected with our technology right now through social media. And with social media, it's like a double-edged sword, because it was originally created to connect people, to be able to build up these networks. But over the course of time, it actually, what I've seen is that it actually makes people further apart from each other, because even when they have an opportunity to speak face to face, a lot of people are not comfortable holding a regular conversation. But they're really good at text and emails, and so they're connected in a digital way. But when we wind it down to its fundamental thing, the digital world is human created. And we have an opportunity to connect with people through conversation, just through eye contact,
Yeah.
And a lot of students, I notice, don't know how to do that. Even, it's so sad because I've seen students having a conversation via text, but they're sitting right next to each other. And so they're texting each other, whether it be a meme, whether it's, texting each other, like, I hate to say it, but like talking smack about other people or saying negative comments about people, but they do it through text because you can't hear it. They can kind of have this secret conversation. But I actually find that very disheartening, because You have an opportunity to speak to people right here in the flesh, look at them in the eyes, to be able to connect on a real personal level. And a lot of students, when they're given that opportunity, do not respond. You know what I mean? Like I'll often ask my students questions and I'll ask them to discuss what their feelings are about it. And all of them just stay quiet and there's no interaction. But over the course of time, especially with being with me, because it is part of my curriculum, they learn how to make these discussions. They learn how to just be open with each other without fear of judgment and to be able to openly express their opinions and their thoughts and to really, really connect with each other. And like what I tell them is they may not always agree, but even in disagreement, you can learn. You can learn about the opposite side of your issue, or you can learn just a little bit more about somebody by understanding why they think the things that they do.
I feel like I take a lot of that into account, especially in the more professional world. You know, having to deal with different types of people. You know, also having to get to know them so that you have that actual connection with them.
Yeah.
Things like that. So that's definitely something that I
absolutely
take away to
and
this day.
yeah, and in the real world, you know, you're gonna be finding yourself working with people that you may not like or that you may not agree with or you just don't get along with, but that doesn't give you an excuse to not interact with them. In fact, that should open up doors for communication, for you to be able to, like, okay, I don't know this person. Like, for example, I have a lot of students that are really into like heavy metal. I don't understand heavy metal. I don't like it. I don't get it. But I use that as a way to open up conversation. Explain to me why you like heavy metal. What is it about this? Because I don't understand. And it's through them being able to describe and explain that I have a deeper appreciation for it. Because even though I may not understand it, even though I don't listen to it, even though it doesn't connect with me, I still am able to understand and recognize that it's art and it's a form of expression. And it's not my form of expression, but what works for me may not work for my student, and what works for my student may not work for me. But it doesn't mean that we can't still develop that relationship.
Right, and you still get like that deep understanding of this other person as well. It's not like you just shut off and you go your separate ways.
Yeah.
There's no conversation at all.
And that's what I see happening with the digital world. If you don't find that instant connection, there is no connection at all. And oftentimes, in order to build a meaningful relationship, you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to ask questions. You know, there's a saying, don't be judgmental, be curious. And so if you already have you meet somebody and just the very first notion that you get, oh, I don't like this person, you're already casting judgment. But if you ask yourself, why don't I like this person? It allows you to have dialogue, and then you actually find that you have more in common than you probably thought at first.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, on to the third question. What role do you think mariachi plays in preserving culture for younger generations?
Well, it definitely gives us an opportunity to bridge generational gaps. That's the biggest thing that I see. Many of the students that I teach are between the ages of 14 and 18. And again, they're stuck in a 21st century world. They're stuck in a world that they don't know, the world without internet. You know, I'm old enough that I can say I grew up in a world with no internet. So I know how things have changed since the internet has become openly available to everyone. The biggest thing that I see is that there's a not miscommunication, but there's misconnection, I guess you could say, misconnection between younger generations and older generations. And especially with the population that I work with, a lot of our grandparents don't speak English. A lot of students don't speak Spanish. And so mariachi is a nice tool that allows us to express ourselves in what I say is our native tongue, but it also allows older people an opportunity to connect with the younger generations, because a lot of the music that we're singing was from when they were younger. And so I always get that at gigs. Oh, I remember this song from when I was a teenager, or I remember hearing my father singing this to me when I was a little girl. And I'm here talking to an 83-year-old woman. And so it also bridges like that memory gap. You know, it gives us an opportunity to tell our stories because in the traditional history class, we're only taught one side of history. And the thing is that we have our personal histories. We have our generational histories that are not written down. And the only way they can be preserved is by telling stories or by sharing music. And music is nothing more than stories set to a musical background.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I love that you said that because I have like a definite personal connection to that. I remember, so I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, half and half, like English and Spanish. And because my dad was born in Mexico and my mom was born in the States, um, they speak both languages, you know. And their first language is Spanish.
mm-hmm.
But because my dad had been here in the States long enough to learn English and be able to properly communicate,
Mm-hmm.
language is mostly English in my household. So it was hard for me to grow up kind of understanding and talking to like my grandparents and my family. But as I continued learning and speaking with them and just giving it my all to try and communicate with them, I got to middle school, and that's when I entered in mariachi. And I remember one of the things my nana will tell me now is like when the song comes on. Specifically, it was a Juan Gabriel song, um, and she was like, that always reminds me of you because you sang it, and like that will always have like that. That honestly made me want to cry when she told that to me because even as people get older, they start forgetting things, but
Absolutely.
what they never forget is about their music.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my nana will always talk about it.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of music is that the older we get, there's more songs that then get tied in with memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of songs that I like. Similarly, my tata, like growing up, I actually, Spanish was my first language, but once I got into the school system, I forgot it. I was only allowed to speak English in the school system. And it was through mariachi that I started regaining that language. I mean, I speak Spanish. I understand it. I'm a little bit pocho in the way that I speak. I'm not 100% fluent like the way I would love to be. But I can communicate well enough with people that are completely fluent, right? But a lot of my musical memories are memories that are tied with like my tata. For example, um, the Tristes Recuerdos. It's a song that he would always sing. And he would sing it really like out of key and purposely make his voice crack, ooh, to make us as little kids laugh. And we would just be like, oh, you're so silly, tata. But then when he died, that was the last song that we sang to him. And then years later, whenever my cousins and I or my tios and I would gather, we would hear that song either on the radio or my tios would ask me to play it. We would all sing it, and it was no longer a laughing ha 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 ha, but it was like remembering Tata, and that's when the tears start, And I remember I have a deaf aunt who is like 98% deaf, so she can barely hear. But I remember we were all gathered at a local park in my nana's neighborhood, and I had my guitar, and my tios were asking for me to sing songs, and of course I had there with my guitar. And then my cousin Cristina said, "Hey, can you sing that song that Tata used to always sing? I don't know what it's called, but can you sing it?" I'm like, "I know exactly which one you're talking about." So I started singing it, and right when I got to that coro, espero que tú escuches esta canción. Donde quiera que te encuentres, espero que tú, al escucharla, te acuerdes de mí, como yo me acuerdo de ti. And everybody, when I had my eyes closed, because I was just like trying to remember the lyrics and just trying to remember my tata singing that when I was a little boy. And when I opened my eyes, everybody was just in tears and completely silent. And even after I had finished singing, normally they would like applaud for me. They're like, "Oh, good job, mijo!" But everybody just stayed in that moment. And I knew just by that one memory, that one musical memory, we were all thinking about my tata. And we're not just thinking, we were feeling his presence at that moment. Even though he physically wasn't with us, we felt him there. And it was just the most beautiful, awkward moment at the same time because everybody was just completely quiet. But we all knew what each other's hearts were saying.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, I was tearing up, kind of like
Yeah.
wanting to tear up hearing that because I will definitely. It might be a little bit different, but I probably will have that experience with my mom when she kind of, when she goes.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the beauty of our music is that it's such an old music, but it's still very much alive, and it's still very vibrant, and it's unique because I have an appreciation for like Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin and Brahms, but that music kind of got stuck in that time period, and we appreciate it, but we relate to it from that time period. With our music, a lot of our music still came from that time period, but we also hear it in our backyards. We hear it at our weddings. We hear it at our baptisms. We hear it at our funerals. And so, yeah.
Ooh, oh. Sorry. Yeah, I definitely just hope if people who don't have that, exact or very close connect to the culture, that's definitely something I would love for everyone to be able to enjoy.
Absolutely. Yeah, and everybody has the opportunity. The real question is, do they have the willingness? So yeah. A lot of my musical memories also stem around the students that I teach.
Yeah.
There's certain repertoire that I literally pulled out for a specific voice, and so every time I hear that song, I'll think about Carlos, I'll think about Danitza, I'll think about Cesar, I'll think about certain people. Every time I hear that, it reminds me of when I was teaching it in the classroom. So it doesn't always have to be like all sad and depressing either, Like there's certain songs that are like, oh, I remember when I heard that at my, like, for example, Sabor a Mi. My wife sang that to me at my wedding. So every time I hear that song, I remember what she looked like when she was in her, and I didn't know she was going to sing to me. And so when she put the chair in the center of the dance floor, and I'm like, what's happening? She said, I'll just have a seat. And I didn't know that she had coordinated with the mariachi to sing that song, and she was in her wedding dress. She still had her veil on, and it was like one of those moments that you see in the movie where everything just blacks out and it's just the two of us in the room. And she's saying, "If I prove how much I love you with each kiss." She started it in English, and then she ended it in Spanish. And then when I looked around, my tios were like sprawled out on the floor, like, oh my God. And like, I just, like, every time I hear Sabor a Mi, as common as a song as it is, I am transported back to that memory. And then also on our wedding day, I remember Frank Sinatra, "Just the way you look tonight." That always brings me back to when my wife and my father-in-law danced their dance together. And it was the same kind of a moment where everything was blackened in the room, and it was like almost like a spotlight was just on them. And I just remember seeing them dance, and I was thinking, I'm going to be a father one day. Is this what it's going to be like when I give my daughter away to be married? Likewise, whenever I hear Maria Elena, that's the song that I danced with my mom. And now that she's no longer here, every time I hear that song, every time I even just think about it, it brings this big knot. It brings a big knot to my throat because that song will always remind me of my mom.
I'm glad that we're able to build all these different memories within the songs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like to some people, that's what it just is. It's a song, but it's what's in our minds and our brains are
Absolutely.
Very sentimental feeling.
Absolutely, and that's what I try to instill in my students, and they don't always get it right away. And just like I was saying in my last period, a lot of the things that you learn in this classroom, you're not going to appreciate until after you've graduated and you're removed from it, and you realize, wow, there's a lot more to this than just learning repertoire.
Yeah, for sure. definitely take so many things from here, including this conversation we're having right now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like taking so much away from this. I'm gonna like keep in my mind for years and years to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alrighty, so on to the next question.
Welcome, by the way.
So how has teaching mariachi or folklorico impacted your life or sense of purpose?
Aside from the things that I just said about transmitting culture, um, I really think deeply about music and dance and art as a way to connect with my spirit. I look at it more as a vocation rather than a career, because if you want it to be a career, then you clock in at 8, you clock out at 3:30, you teach repertoire, you put on a concert, you say bye.
Mhm.
For me, long after the bell rings, I have a lot of these students in my mind. A lot of them will reach out to me after school hours to express their thoughts and opinions to me. If they're having personal problems or personal crises, they'll reach out to me asking for advice. Um, when my mom was dying, um, I turned to my students for emotional support. And like I said, I look at this as a sacred space to be able to openly express thought without judgment, and to remind each other that we are all human, and not any one of us is perfect, but with each other's support we can get through anything. It may not happen right away. Sometimes you can solve a problem in half hour, sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes a week, a month, a year, sometimes it takes an entire lifetime. But what's important is that we turn to each other for communal support, so to remind ourselves that we're not alone. We're not the only ones that have felt this pain. We're not the only ones that have felt this joy. We're not the only ones that have felt this excitement or whatever emotion. There is at least one other person, whether they're sitting in this room or here at this school, that is feeling something similar to what you're feeling. And if we can rely on each other to get through those things, not only do we build the relationship, but we also build that confidence within ourselves.
I really like the way that you put that. It's not just work. It's a whole embodiment
Yeah.
of like things that you do for your kids and the kids things that you do for you.
Yeah. And
It's like
I've been teaching for over 23 years, and I'm still friends with some of my first students. They'll reach out to me, and it's funny because they still call me Mr. Enriquez, but they already have kids of their own. And I'm like, no, 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 you can call me Justin. And all of them are like, well, it's just so hard to call you Justin. But that also becomes part of the evolving of the relationship, right? Like in this classroom, everybody calls me Mr. Enriquez. There's still a few students that have already graduated and have been graduated for a long time. They'll still call me Mr. Enriquez, and I'll be like, I'm Justin. And they're like, oh, okay, okay. But I'm still friends with a lot of my former students. Or if I'm not necessarily in touch with them all the time, I'll ask through people like your mom, for example. I'll always ask about you, how's Alexis doing? And she'll be like, oh, yeah, she's at the U of A doing this, doing that. And so, like, it is an opportunity for me to have those lasting relationships. And even if they're just fleeting moments where we reconnect, it's like we connect and we kind of picked up where we left off, right? Like when you came in today, I was like, it was like we had never, like, we're the same as we were back when you graduated. And so I there's a handful of students that are like part of like my real inner circle, because we've gone through like real personal things like death and like marriage, and I've baptized a few people kids, so a few of my students kids and stuff like that. And so, but then even if they're not part of the inner circle, when I see them out in the community, they'll be like, Mr. Enriquez, how are you doing? I'll be like, oh my God, it's just like you pick up like where you left off. So
yeah, no, totally. When I came in and we sat in the circle, I was like, wow, I'm getting, like
Flashbacks.
So flashbacks. And like when you started doing the Enriquez, and I was like, I was able to remember like the majority of it. After that, but I was like, yeah, it was a sense of like being at peace coming in here for just a moment, even it was just like an hour for the day. Yeah, I totally felt that again.
I'm very honored that you say that. I've actually heard that quite a bit recently. I have a student right now that's just about to graduate, and he's stuck behind after class, and he just looks around, and I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I'm gonna miss this. I'm like, what part of this are you gonna miss? And he said, the peace that I feel when I'm in this room. And I don't take full responsibility for that. Everybody who's in this room is a part of that. And if that's how you feel, then I know that I'm doing my job correctly. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, it's something that I take with me, that I remember, and I sit here and I'm like, I really do miss it. Like honestly, I think about it often, even more now that I've started this project. I will sit here and like think about it. I was like crying a few days ago thinking about the different experiences I've had within the classes. It definitely gives like a sense of peace.
Well, that's an honor for me. Thank you.
Right here, if I tap it, turn it off, and then so moving on to the next question. Why do you think arts and culture programs like this are important in our schools and communities today?
I think you answered that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. The arts in general, but specifically with music, it gives us an opportunity to escape the real world. When you look out into the real world, at least what I see is division. I see a lot of hate. I see a lot of unrest. I see a lot of poverty, a lot of injustice. And even for 94 minutes, we can come together as a class, work on a similar goal, learn how to manage each other, because we're not always going to agree, just like out in the real world. But at least we have a structured place that's not, that doesn't harness judgment and allows everybody to openly make mistakes and without fear of being reprimanded for it or hated for it. For me, I find peace in this room. It's not always hard. It's not always like peaceful and like kumbaya-ish. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a lot of struggle. It's a lot of managing of personalities, a lot of like sympathizing, empathizing. Sometimes it's that tough love. Yeah. And, I've always been very honest with my students, and sometimes the truth hurts. And so they go home feeling defeated, or they feel like I'm picking on them, or they feel like maybe I was a little too harsh. And I struggle with that because I have my self-doubts, and I always reflect at home, and I'm like, maybe I was a little too harsh with this student, or maybe I could have stated it a little bit differently. But ultimately, I think the majority of my students know that when I give them critique, it's not criticism. There's two different, it comes from the same stem, but they're not the same concept. Critique is meant to uplift and to help and to make them stronger, whereas criticism is to tear you down and to destroy your spirit. And ultimately, all I'm here to do is to remind students that they already have a strong spirit. They just need to be brave enough to show it to the world and to be at peace with themselves, because if they can be at peace with themselves, then they can manage any kind of conflict without violence.
Very true. I find that a lot, troubling within myself. There are a lot of things that I haven't found peace within myself, but for the things that I have, it makes it way easier to be able to work with other people, to interact with other people. So
and to also recognize that as humans, we're gonna slip. Yeah. There's times where I know that they've seen me, like, where I get really angry and I lose it. but it also shows that I'm not perfect and that I'm not human. But upon my own self reflection and demonstration of the values and the lessons that I'm trying to instill in them, that they can use me as an example. Well, if Mr. Enriquez could get through it, then I can get through it, you know? And you know, it's human to make mistakes. It's human to to err.
Mhm.
What's not human is to stay there. I really believe that it's in everyone's nature to do good and to learn how to get past your own self and your own ego in order to realize that if you want to promote change, you have to demonstrate change first. That's why the Enriquez is so important. We always address you first before me, right? Tú eres mi otro yo. It's not yo soy tu otro yo. No, it always, if you want respect, you have to dish out respect first, and then you'll get respect in return. If you want to be loved, you have to love first, and then people will love you. See, and I think right now we're too geared in hate, or at least into a divisive or divisive mentality, and so we're stuck in our own pride to find an actual solution. We're getting further and further away from center instead of coming to the center, which is why we're also in a circle. And I always tell them, let's bring the circle in. And they all come in, because when people get uncomfortable, they start moving their chairs away, you know? And I'm like, you're going the wrong way. There's really only two directions. You're either walking towards something or you're going away from it. If you're walking towards a problem, you can solve it. If you're running away from it, when you come back, it's still going to be there. So.
I love the symbolism. While in high school, not that I didn't appreciate that we sat in a circle. It like helped us in a lot of different ways. It's just that I didn't know it had that deeper symbolism.
Oh yeah.
To it.
It also promotes equity because everybody has their place in the circle.
Mhm.
There's not one person that's closer to me or one person that's further away from me. I'm always in the center, and all I got to do is just swivel my chair, and I can have equal access to everybody.
Yeah.
And then when it needs to be something that they need to hash out without my interjection, I get out of the circle, and you notice they formed in a circle without my having to tell anything. I heard somebody over here, and all I had to do was that, and they know exactly what they need to do. And I'm not trying to like command anybody, because everybody is free to do whatever they want. But I give them the choice, and if they're given the choice, I see that they often respond in a positive way. And if they don't, they can walk out the door, and they will still not be judged. When they're ready to come back, the circle will always be here.
Really do that. Just gives me like a better outlook. It's not like you're just being tough just because you're giving people the chance to do what they need to do.
Yeah, and I always tell them they're not forced to do anything, because if I'm forcing them to do everything that I want them to do, they're not really learning anything. They're just regurgitating what they want, what the teacher wants to hear. But if I make it a choice for them to do it, and they willingly participate, they start to discover things about themselves that was always there. I just help them find it.
Yeah, it's a real question. I really appreciate it. Alrighty, on to last question. What do you envision for the future of mariachi and folklorico education?
Unity. Mold it into something that's authentically us. And it may not be 100% accurate what's on the page, but if the feeling and the spirit is there, then that's what unites the people. That's what unites us as musicians. That's what unites us as listeners. That's what unites us as dancers. That's what unites us as community. And so if we set ourselves up, oh, I have to play it exactly the way it's written on the page, we're setting ourselves up for failure, because none of us is perfect. So you're striving for something that even just as a regular human being, you can't accomplish. What's going to make you think you can do that in art?
Yes. When I was up there in your class earlier, I remember you were telling your students that you guys should, kind of, how did you phrase it? It was about jamming out together. and how everyone sits there and like someone just randomly starts playing,
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone jumps along. And I remember when I was in middle school, I usually just did I think it was like intermediate classes, and
Mm-hmm.
when that actually happened, oh my god, I felt like the whole world was just kind of spinning for all of us, and it was so loud, and everyone was there just to be a part of one thing,
Mm-hmm.
united, not like, oh, I go to this school and I have this instructor, and like you said, it's like I'm better than you, or like you're better than me. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter in that moment.
And that's how I grew up with the mariachi conference. Yeah, sure, you learn what you're being taught in the workshops, but the majority of the repertoire that I learned was outside of workshops, and it was in the jam sessions with people that were my own age. And a lot of that has changed, especially with this competitive culture that's been introduced into mariachi. Because now you have these jam sessions that are, first of all, not spontaneous. They're like calculated. Like, we will have a jam session from 8:30 to 12:30 p.m. and it's going to be in this room. Before, it was just like somebody picked up their instrument. Hey, I know that song. They would jump in, and then like eventually it turned into like everybody in the room is jamming out. Now it's like you got like one group that starts a song and they're like, well, and then like other people, they're like, well, I'm not going to go join because I don't know that song. And I'm like, that's the reason why you need to jam in, because you don't know it. Go in there and learn it. You know what I mean? And that's how our culture has changed a lot. When I was a kid, it's because I didn't know how to play A los Cuatro Vientos. It's because I didn't know how to play Gorrioncito Pecho Amarillo. It's because I didn't know how to play Cascabel or Violín Huapango. I would go in there y a huevo. I would try and I would mess up, but I also knew that nobody was going to judge me, because half of the people in the room don't know the song either. But now it's like, if you don't know the song, it's like you can't be part of the jam session. That's not a real jam session. That's not really what this is about. And so I always tell my students, and I try to get them prepared for the jam session so that they go in with confidence, but I also let them know, if you're not confident or you don't know the song, go in anyway.
Yeah.
Go in anyway. Don't let that stop you. You'll learn a lot more that way.
Yeah, I think the first jam session, and I remember it specifically because you actually played the first song that I ever did in like a jam session at the conference. It was La Negra. I had no idea how to play it. I didn't grow up like from elementary and going to outside groups. I grew up like doing mariachi within the school.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I felt like a lot of my peers were more well informed and knew the song better, but it didn't matter. I sat there and I was a little timid at first, but when they start encouraging you, they start like signaling, just come on, like just watch me, let's do it, and that's how it became fun for me.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how I ended up like continuing to learn it, and when we ended up getting to learn it in class, I had a good idea of like what to do, because I just jumped into it.
Because at least you have the experience, and you know what not to do, or you know what you did well. I have my daughter. She's 10 years old. I took her to a mariachi conference in Las Cruces last year, and she knew some of the songs, but she was also kind of reluctant to be part of the jam session because she was only 9 at the time, and then the next oldest person was probably like 15 or 16, so there was a big gap there. And she goes, no, Daddy, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm like, just go in there. Just do it. And so she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, your mom and dad are going to be right here. Nothing's going to happen. Just go have fun. She went in there and she started playing Cascabel with all these older kids, and then all of a sudden the kids were like looking at her like, oh my God, you play really badass, and there was a point where like the whole room kind of just stopped and it was just her playing.
Oh, wow.
And like all these older kids were encouraging her, and I saw in that instant her confidence boosted up. And then like the next day, the jam session was happening again, and they're like, Aria, come over. And like they welcomed her in, when as before she was kind of like, oh, they're not going to accept me. They were now inviting her, and they were just impressed by the previous night that she was bold enough to just try. And then they accepted her, and then she was just like on cloud 9. And so like that's the reward of being an educator. And I got to witness it with my daughter, but I get to witness it every day with these students, because there's always one student every single day where I see that now it makes total sense, but when I can see them doing it as an ensemble, that's when I'm like, wow.
Yeah, and that's the part where everyone comes together, and it ties back to, you said, like, what you hope for is unity. That's what I wasn't very informed that the the conferences and like jam sessions are more kind of structured now. But
Mm-hmm.
now knowing that, I hope that at some point that people will still feel like that unity, just like naturally.
Yeah.
It's not like okay, we're gonna do it this time or this time. Like,
Yeah,
so,
yeah. And what was nice about it when I was growing up is that, like, I remember my mom being in the crowd listening, or like having people like, "Hey, do you know this song? No, but we'll try it," you know? And then you had like your abuelos and abuelas listening and singing along with like kids that are only like 8 or 9, you know? And that is the beauty of our music. And we're starting to stray away from that, but as long as I'm teaching, I'm gonna make sure that we stay as close to that as possible, even if I'm the only one out there doing it.
oh, I'm very getting very sentimental over this because I just miss this. Like I really do miss all this.
Well, you can always come back. The circle's always here.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.